Hello, good people, and welcome back. Let's proceed with our let's proceed with our learning of Python. So our next step here, we will learn about basically variables in Python, and functions in Python. So basically, we want to know the how functions are defined and the likes. We have functions defined inside of a function and the likes. So let's get started, and then we'll do examples as we go along. Yeah. So what do we mean by basically we have something called a scope, right? So basically an object's scope, right? That's this object scope. Object scope. Basically, this is a object scope is a variable function. Only visible, part of a program. I hope that's hope that makes sense when we talk of a scope, an object scope. Basically a scope itself, like basically it's about this visible part of a program. Yeah. So basically we're going to cover more of this. So but what our definition of an object scope is: a variable or function object only visible part of a program, right? When you have a variable, as I just said, variable inside a function, yeah, the variable, the scope. Now this is where the scope comes in. This is now where the definition of the scope comes in. The scope of the variable is only limited to inside. How does that make sense? That if the function, if we have a variable, being defined inside a function, right? The scope of the function, like where the variable is only going to work, is only inside the function. That's the limitation. It's limited to inside the function. How does that make sense? After the first assignment, basically what we're trying to talk about here is how the variable that's defined inside a function can be used in the function. So basically it can be used, it can be, we have assignments and the likes, right? So we're going to do an example. Then we'll see how we have variables defined inside a function can be just used inside the function itself. Those are called local variables, right? Local variables. So basically what this does is extends from assignment to the end of the function. Yeah, I hope that's clear. We're going to do an example. So we're going to do an example of let's do an example. An example is we have variables. Cent inch. Yeah. So this will be, let's say, 2.54. We have inch per foot. It will be 12. Let's create a function. So height centimeters. So we go to height 2 centimeters. We said here we're passing the parameters right here, then we're passing the arguments later. This is called feet. We have a parameter called feet and inches. Yeah. This is where we ident the program. So we're going to say, well, okay, here we're trying to convert height in feet or inches to centimeters. So we want to convert height to centimeters. So we're going to say total inches so we're going to pass our feet, right? Our feet is just right here. So to pass our feet multiplied by inches per foot. How is it called? Inch. Let's go foot. Right? Then we add inches. So ours we have our inches right here. So we pass inches. Right? So centimeters. Let me just set info is equals to total inches. What we just calculate it right here. So it's total underscore inches multiplied by centimeters per inch. So what we had initially was cent underscore inch. Yeah, so what we just have right here. What we want to use to calculate centimeters. How that makes sense? Then we return centimeters. How that makes sense? So let's take in the feet and the inches as we find here. So the feet is equals to we want to have it in integer. Let me go have an input. Let me say enter feet. Yeah. And then we want to enter inches as well. We enter feet. We want to enter inches as well. So we have feet and inches. Now let's have a print statement. So print let's do print. Then we have a format string. Let's just write in full centimeters. Then we pass the name of our function, we call our function. Height, let's go centimeters. Then you pass the feet and inches. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Let's run this in function 14. So when we run this, let's go to functions. So let's do Python function 14. So let's enter fate. Okay, I'm just going to play around with numbers. We've written our height. We've written our yeah. So basically it's 167.6400. We can have it to any decimal numbers we have, as we have learned how to reduce the floating point we have. Yeah. So that's the answer we have. But here we were trying to go through local variable, like a local variable that it's just limited inside the function, right? So the difference between a local variable and a global variable is that the global variables extend to the end of the file. How does that make sense? In that we have local variable that's just limited to the inside of the function, right? But a global variable sticks to the end of the function. How that makes sense? And we've seen the example. Our other, so that's local variable as well, global variable. So global variable, basically this, as we've said, extends to the end of the file. Sorry about that. Extends to the end of the file, right? So basically it's defined outside of a function. And basically it extends from the assignment to the end of the file. Can be accessed and faster as well. Can be accessed. And that is inside a function. And another so is a function extend from the file. Right outside of a function. How that makes sense? So these are the definition of basically what global variable does. This basically global statement has to be used, right? Has to be used to change the value. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let's list this value. So if you want to change inside a function. So we want to change a value, right? A value of a variable. If you want to change a value of a global variable inside a function, you use the keyword global. How does that make sense? We can do an example of how we access the global variable names, and how we are able to modify the global variable. Let's do an example. Yeah, an example. So let's have a global variable. We're going to put an employee name, right? So we have a global, let's say not applicable, right? Because it's our first time defining it. Let's now create our function. So we want to get name, right? Get underscore name. So we have a function here called get underscore name. So we want to have a name here is equals to, we now want to get an input from a user. And remember, because it's just a string, we're not going to define it being a string, because by default it's a string. So we want to say enter. Enter employee name. Yeah. So once a user has entered the employee name, we now want to equate to our initial variable we create for an employee name. So employee name equals to. So we've now assigned this name we just entered here to our variable name we had initially. How does that make sense? So then after that we call the function get underscore name. Right? Let's print what we have. We print format string. Then we pass its employee name. Employee name. Then we pass our employee name right here. Employee. So what has happened here is we've been able to, first we had the employee name here, we accessed it inside the function, and then we've been able to print it outside. Let's let's in our function 15. Function 15. So we don't say user arc. So basically, we have the employee name being called here. We have the employee name being called here, but when we call the function, our last call still calls the global variable and we had initially, and that's why it's being printed here. Basically, what we're trying to show here is that it has not been this requirement has not been met. Basically, we've not been able to change the value. Hope that makes sense. Right here, as we create this variable name, as in here, we might think we have changed the employee name from the NA to what the user just entered, right? But as we talked about it here in the requirements or in the characteristics, it's that we must use the global statement, right? So basically, for a function to know that this name here or this function here should use the employee name from the global variable. This is a global variable. So what we're supposed to do is that we're supposed to use the global. We're supposed to use the global statement. This one right here. So let's try and as we've seen in our result right here, the output is still use the name arc for the user, but the employee name still remains as NA. Now let's ensure that the employee name as defined here picks the name which the user enters. So what we want to do is we're going to call the global, and then we pass the variable name, it's employee. Yeah, right here. So doing that, this will ensure that our function changes the employee name from the global variable name to the new one. Let's retry that, and then I will pass ARK as well. So the employee name right now is ARK, as we have seen. I hope that makes sense between not using this and using this, and this comes from this statement we've talked of how the global variable works. I hope that makes sense of our description of a global and a local variable. In case anyone has questions, let me know, but that this should make enough sense of how variables are assigned, or basically the scope of variables as we've seen the local and global variable. That's it for today. I hope you've learned one or two things. In case you have any questions, let me know. You can do more examples of this and this, basically the local variable and the global variable. I hope that makes sense, and thank you for your time. See you in the next one.